What's up, everybody? It's Ronald, and I need your help. We're trying to grow the audience of Leaving the Theater, and the first step to doing that is by getting some information from you, my dedicated, loyal, and opinionated listeners. So wherever you're listening right now, please go to the show notes of this episode and click on the link that says Listener Survey. By completing this survey, you're helping to support the growth of Leaving the Theater and ohitsBigRon Studios. We use this information to determine how often we release episodes, if and when you hear ads, what types of ads you'll hear, and generally just to find out who exactly listens to the show. If we know the audience, we can grow the audience. So please complete that survey as soon as you can. Once again, it's in the show notes. It's very easy. It takes probably about an average of 6 to 8 minutes to complete. Nothing too intrusive. You will be helping the show. So please complete that survey. Thank you so much. Now let's start the show. In the summer of 1969, for 6 weeks in New York City, the Harlem Cultural Festival hosted some of the greatest Black musical acts of its day. From Stevie Wonder and Nina Simone to Gladys Knight and the Pips, some of the most notable musical talent in history showed up to entertain the majority Black crowd in Harlem. Well attended by over 300,000 folks, this event in a lot of ways disappeared, living only as a memory in the minds of performers and attendees alike, as the recorded tapes that bore witness to this event sat in a basement unwatched for decades. Summer of Soul, or When the Revolution Wasn't Televised, plays that concert for us and provides context on a missing piece of Black history. I'm Ronald Young Jr., and I'm on the couch. All right, this is Ronald, and I am on the couch after watching Summer of Soul, or When the Revolution Could Not Be Televised. Produced by David Dinerstein, Robert Fyvolent, and Joseph Patel, directed by Questlove. All right, so this movie is about the Harlem Cultural Festival, which took place... This movie was nominated for Best Documentary Feature and is available on Hulu and on Disney+. So you can watch it on both of those. So this movie is about the Harlem Cultural Festival, which took place in 1969 in Harlem, New York City. And it is basically a who's who event of all of these. It's essentially a concert. So they called it a festival of culture, music, and fashion. But this focuses on the concert. I imagine that there maybe were other elements that weren't really shown in the documentary. But it's basically, it shows all, it revolves heavily around the musical performances of all of these acts that showed up in Harlem for 6 weeks during the summer of 1969. At the same time, Woodstock was happening, but this was also happening. And one of the things it talks about was that it was filmed the entire time for the 6 weeks, and the tapes had been lost in someone's basement until they were finally seen last year for the first time. So 2021, when this came out on Hulu, was the first time people actually laid eyes on all of this history, all of this Black history, which feels appropriate to talk about this month. And I'm glad that it's nominated for an Oscar. This is the second documentary of the 5 that have been nominated for Oscars that I've seen. I've seen this one. I've seen Flea. Flea was definitely a very good documentary, very heart-wrenching. This one I liked because it centered Black joy. It starts off and it's just a concert. And when I say just a concert, I mean most of the pieces revolve around people looking at the actual musical acts. They've given us complete, like, whole sets of people doing their music. They have some people who had performed, from the performers who were there They interview them. They interview Gladys Knight. They interview Stevie Wonder. They interview Sheila E., who wasn't there, but one of the acts that she was influenced by was there. They interview two of the members from Fifth Dimension, including McCoy. I want to say Marilyn McCool. That might not be her name, but anyway, they interview all of these acts, and together it kind of just puts together. And I think one of the best parts that they do is they show the people doing the interviews. They show them during their talking heads, watching the footage that we as the audience are also seeing. And you can kind of see the wonder on their faces as they're seeing this footage that no one has ever seen before, including them. No one's ever seen it. So they're seeing themselves perform from all of these years ago. And I mean, for some people, I imagine if they were filming this, let's say in 2019 or 2020, I mean, this is stuff that they hadn't seen for 50 years, like we're talking a long time. So it's very incredible to watch those portions. The performance elements are very good. There is some story here, and the story really just becomes about how all of the music was in Harlem was represented. How Harlem was represented, how Black Harlem was, how historically Black Harlem was, and in a lot of cases still is, and what it looks like, what all of that looked like as they're putting together this festival. It was headed by a man named Tony Lawrence, who was a lounge singer, front man. People really liked him. And he's the one who put all of it together. And I mean, I don't know, he did it completely free and somehow found a way to pay all of these acts, which is wild. Oh, that's right. Because he got Folgers to sponsor the event, which is wild. Again, wild. Folgers and General Mills, if I'm not mistaken. So it was a rousing success. They don't talk about any fights or riots or any of that happened, but they do set it up against the backdrop of, the things that were going on at the time. Also during 1969, they landed a man on the moon. I think there's a portion of this where they kind of talk about Black folks and how they felt about them, spending money to go to the moon when all of these Black folks are, they're in Harlem. Some of them are in poverty, and they're like, they could have spent some of that money feeding poor Black folks in Harlem. And there's a strong sentiment from Black folks in Harlem saying like that going to the moon was a waste of time, and they don't really care about that. But what they do care about is the concert that they're at right now, which I thought it felt good to actually see and watch because mostly because, we're taught about the moon landing being and space exploration kind of being the end all be all for most Americans, but to know that there are people that were like, we don't care about this. There's other things that are more important right here on Earth. I think it's an important sentiment. And it also feels like a very logical sentiment to have at the time. I think some of my favorite parts about this were once again, seeing Fifth Dimension was pretty cool. There was a band that everyone thought was white, did some very popular hits. And it turns out they get on stage, and one of the things that they said was it was really good to be in a Black audience doing their music and to be well received by a Black audience. And the music just goes so many different genres. They start off with B.B. King, and by the time we get to the end, by the time we get to Nina Simone, Sly and the Family Stone, Stevie Wonder. They start with Stevie Wonder, then B.B. King. And I mean, David Ruffin is out there. I mean, of course, Fifth Dimension, like all of these, Gladys Knight and the Pips, Mahalia Jackson, all of these groups come out there, and it really does become a celebration of all of these different Black styles of music that like really just go across the diaspora, one, and two, just, the stuff where you're just like, wow, this is just it's very soulful. Like name of the movie being Summer of Soul. Like you really get a sense of what soul is. And when you hear all these music played next to each other, there's also like as a person who was born in the 80s, raised in the 90s, I was raised on 90s gospel and, gangster rap of the 90s and R&B of the 90s. And of course, also of the early 2000s. So the sounds that I have in my head they're diverse, but they're very different from the sounds back then. The sounds back then, I had a tendency to kind of fold them all into this like amalgamation of that's 70s, That's all. And it kind of all sounds like Gladys Knight and the Pips to me. But when you hear Gladys Knight and the Pips next to Stevie Wonder, next to Sly and the Family Stone, next to Nina Simone, you really then start to hear the difference between all of these different sounds. And I know there's probably people out there that are like, Ronald, what are you talking about? Like, that's crazy. I'm like, no, this was something that I needed to learn and I needed to hear. And it was entertaining. It was entertaining because one, and I think another part of it that made it so good was they have cameras that were facing the crowds. So you see crowds of Black folks just in the crowd watching. They can see the cameras looking at them. They're looking at the cameras and they're just in there. They're dancing. They're doing their thing. They're just hanging out. They're just existing. And most images that you get of Black folks from the 60s and 70s, they're always struggling or like fighting or doing something. And this ones, they're just hanging out, dancing, just at the park. And it felt there was something very relatable and very humanizing about all of it in a way that, like whenever you see Black stories where Black people just get to exist and hang out and have a great time, it always makes me feel better. And just seeing people just doing what Black people do, just waiting for the concert to start, hoping that Sly shows up, you know what I mean? And which reminded me a bit of Lauryn Hill not showing up to her concert or showing up late. But one of the parts that I really liked was, they had a gospel day where they have all of these different gospel groups come out. Mahalia Jackson, the Evans Hawkins singers who sang "Oh Happy Day," and it made me laugh because there's a whole segment of the documentary in which they talk about how the church wasn't happy with the Evan Hawkins singers. They were from a Pentecostal church. I am also from a Pentecostal background, still a member of a Pentecostal church, and they talk about how the church was upset because "Oh Happy Day" took off and was everywhere. And Evan Hawkins is like, hey, this might be the only way we get the gospel to the world. And this might be the only way people hear it. And the backlash that they had reminded me of the same backlash that Kirk Franklin received back in like 1996, 97, 98, around that time when he came out with Stomp, which was a big hit. Everyone really liked it. And the church was like, this ain't gospel music. This ain't what you gonna be out here doing this kind of music for. And so it seems like anytime there's gospel music that breaks out of the gospel charts, that makes the mainstream, that is touring the country, because the Evan Hawkins singers were touring the country at the time. Whenever that happens, there seems to be some backlash as to say like, oh, well, this isn't how you should be doing it, even though it like directly falls in the mandate of being evangelical and spreading the gospel. Of course, I'm not trying to proselytize right now, but it's just an interesting portion of the documentary that obviously links it to today. It's good. I liked it. I liked it a lot. I think that there wasn't much of a story there. There wasn't much one to be told, but I don't think that changes or makes this a bad movie or makes this not good. I don't like sitting there. I'm like, there's not much of a story to tell here. It's just a good way to present the footage. And I'm thinking if you're going to find out what the best way to present it, I think that Questlove really did come up with the best way to like present this footage forward for all of us to see. And I think it's important. Granted, I'm late to the party. A lot of people were telling me to watch this months ago, and I just never got around to it. So I'm glad it was picked as an Oscar because it allowed me to catch up on it and, get a good chance to kind of see what was going on here. So I enjoyed it. Yeah. That's pretty much all I got to say about it. I enjoyed it. I think I'll give it 4 of 5 stars. As of between this and Flea, I would pick this for best documentary, but there's 3 other ones I haven't watched yet, which I will watch. But yeah, I think right now this is the front runner in the documentary feature category. I don't know if it has more momentum than Flea right now, because I think Flea is getting a bit of momentum, but Flea is also nominated in 3 categories: best animated feature, best documentary feature, and best foreign language film. So it has a chance to win in more than one place. I don't know if it'll make a sweep, but I think sometimes Oscar voters will look at a movie like Flea and just be like, I liked Encanto, I'm going to vote for Encanto. I like Summer of Soul, I'm going to vote for Summer of Soul. And then they'll be like, I'll give Flea my best foreign language vote. But then your question is there, you hope that something else isn't there going to beat it out. So we'll see what happens. It gets very political in the voting booth. But yeah, with that, 4 or 5 stars. Check it out. Available on Hulu. And with that, Leaving the Theater is a production of Oh It's Big Ron Studios. Theme music by the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. To find out more about this show and other Oh It's Big Ron Studios shows, Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at ohitsBigRon. That's at ohitsBigRon. If you like this show, I host another show on the Pushkin Industries podcast network called Solvable. Check that out wherever you listen. Leaving the Theater will be back soon, but until then, I'll be here on the couch.